time to October 21st, 2015. And tonight, ABC's Darren Ravel goes for the ride of a lifetime in a pimped-out DeLorean straight out of Back to the Future.
On the 19th of October, 1982, in a room at the Sheraton Plaza Lorena Hotel in Los Angeles, a man sat across from a suitcase. Inside the suitcase was 59 pounds of cocaine. The man picked up a brick of the cocaine, held it, and said, while being filmed by cameras he did not know were present, that it was better than gold. The man's name was John Zachary DeLorean. He had been, until recently, the most glamorous executive in the American automobile industry. He had been the youngest division head in General Motors history. He had been photographed for the covers of national magazines. He had been married to one of the most famous models in the world. He had been, by almost any measure, the most compelling figure the car industry had produced in a generation. He had also, somewhere in the gap between who he was and who he needed to be, built a car factory in Belfast at the height of the Troubles, designed a car that the world wasn't quite sure what to do with, borrowed money he couldn't repay from a government that was running out of patience, and ended up in a hotel room in Los Angeles holding cocaine while the FBI watched. This is the complete story of John DeLorean, the dream, the cocaine, and the collapse, and what the stainless steel car that bore his name became afterward. John DeLorean at GM. John DeLorean was born in Detroit in 1925. His father was a Ford factory worker. His mother was of Romanian descent, a woman of fierce ambition for her children in a city and an era that offered real opportunities to people who were willing to work hard enough to take them. DeLorean worked. He studied engineering at the Lawrence Institute of Technology and then at the Chrysler Institute. He joined Packard's engineering department, then moved to General Motors in 1956, arriving at the Pontiac division at a moment that, with hindsight, looks almost perfectly timed. We have already told the story of what happened at Pontiac in the early 1960s. The GTO, the muscle car era, the brand transformation that turned a conservative family car manufacturer into the most exciting division in GM DeLorean was central to all of it. The GTO was his idea. The Firebird's development benefited from his direction. His tenure at Pontiac was the engineering and commercial high watermark of everything the brand ever achieved. He was promoted to Chevrolet, the largest and most important division in General Motors, and became the youngest division general manager in the company's history at 40 years old. He was tall, he was handsome in a way that was unusual among automotive executives, jaw-cut, tanned, with a personal style that owed more to Hollywood than to Detroit. He wore fashionable clothes. He socialized with celebrities. He had the first of several high-profile marriages. GM's management, which was populated largely by conservative, conventional men from the Midwestern industrial tradition, was not entirely comfortable with John DeLorean. He was too visible, too unconventional, too willing to say publicly what he thought, which was sometimes at variance with what the company thought. He resigned from GM in 1973. He was 48 years old and one of the most recognized figures in the American car industry. And he had an idea. The vision. The idea was a sports car. Not a sports car in the American muscle tradition, not a high-displacement, high-horsepower, straight-line machine. A sports car in the European grand touring tradition. Mid-engined or rear-engined with a fiberglass backbone chassis, lightweight construction, and bodywork unlike anything on the market. DeLorean hired Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Italian designer responsible for some of the most significant automotive shapes of the 1970s, including the original Volkswagen Golf and the BMW M1, to design the body. Giugiaro produced a shape that was, in 1976, genuinely extraordinary. The Gullwing doors, hinged at the roof, opening upward and outward in two dramatic wings, were the most visually distinctive feature. The brushed stainless steel body panels, not painted but left in their natural metallic state, were unlike anything in production or proposed for production anywhere in the world. The car was designed to be safe. This was DeLorean's specific personal commitment. He had been publicly critical of the American car industry's approach to safety for years, and the DMC-12 was intended to demonstrate that a beautiful, desirable sports car could also be engineered with genuine regard for occupant protection. The original specification called for a mid-mounted engine. The configuration that Dallara and Stanzani had demonstrated at Lamborghini was optimal for sports car dynamics. Engineering challenges and development costs forced a change to a rear-mounted engine using a Peugeot-Renault Volvo V6. The compromise was the first of many. It would not be the last. DeLorean needed a factory. He needed capital, and he found, in the British government and in the political geography of Northern Ireland, an unlikely source of both. Belfast. Belfast in 1978 was a city in crisis. The Troubles, the conflict between Republican and Loyalist paramilitary organizations, the British Army, and the Royal Ulster Constabulary had been running for almost a decade. The city's economy was devastated. Unemployment in parts of West Belfast ran above 30%. Investment had fled. The prospect of attracting any significant manufacturing employer to Northern Ireland seemed, to most observers, remote. The British government was desperate to demonstrate that normal economic life could continue in Northern Ireland. Margaret Thatcher's government, and the Callaghan government before it, understood that employment and economic hope were weapons against the conditions that sustained the conflict. A factory that employed thousands of people in West Belfast was not merely a commercial proposition, it was a political one. John DeLorean arrived with a proposition. He would build his car factory in Northern Ireland. He would create thousands of jobs. He needed capital, approximately £100 million from the British government to get the facility operational. The government agreed. The Dunmurry factory was built on a site in West Belfast. It employed, at its peak, approximately 2,500 workers. Catholics and Protestants working alongside each other in a city where that was not to be taken for granted. The factory was, by any measure, a physical expression of the argument that economic normalcy was possible in Northern Ireland in 1978. Production began in 1981. The DMC-12 that emerged from the Dunmurry factory was, in many respects, exactly what DeLorean had promised. The stainless steel body was startling, the gullwing doors worked, the interior, designed by Giugiaro, was considered and distinctive. The car looked like nothing else on the road. The problems lay beneath the surface. The car itself. The DMC-12 was a car that looked better than it drove. The PRV V6 engine, shared with the Renault 30 and the Volvo 260, a unit designed for comfort and longevity in family cars rather than performance in sports cars, produced 130 horsepower. In a car that weighed approximately 1,230 kilograms, this produced a 0 to 60 time of approximately 10.5 seconds. Road testers in 1981 were polite but unambiguous. This was not a fast car. For a machine that looked as dramatic as the DMC-12, the performance was disappointing. Motor Trend, Car and Driver, Road and Track all found the car visually compelling and dynamically underwhelming. The handling was acceptable. The ride was reasonable. The build quality, particularly in early examples, had inconsistencies that reflected the challenges of establishing production in a new factory with an inexperienced workforce. The price, approximately $29,825 by 1982, was a further problem. At that price, the DMC-12 competed with cars that were significantly more capable. The Corvette, the Porsche 924, the Mazda RX-7. All of them offered more driving engagement, more performance, and in most cases comparable or better build quality. The American market, which had been primed by years of DeLorean's promotional brilliance to expect something transformative, encountered something that was interesting but not exceptional. Sales were disappointing. The production rate, initially projected to reach 20,000 cars per year, never approached that figure. Approximately 9,000 DMC-12s were produced in total before production stopped. The financial position of DeLorean Motor Company deteriorated rapidly. The British government's patience, already strained by costs that had exceeded initial projections significantly, was reaching its limit. DeLorean was running out of time and running out of money simultaneously. The FBI sting. Transition into crisis. By early 1982, DeLorean Motor Company needed approximately $17 million to survive. Every legitimate avenue for raising that capital had been exhausted. Banks had declined. Investors had considered and withdrawn. The British government had made clear that additional public funds were not available. DeLorean was introduced through a chain of connections that remains somewhat murky in the historical record to a man named James Timothy Hoffman. Hoffman was a drug smuggler who had been arrested and had subsequently agreed to become an informant for the Drug Enforcement Administration and the FBI. Hoffman presented DeLorean with a proposition: an investment in a cocaine transaction that would generate the capital DeLorean needed to save his company. The precise sequence of events, who approached whom, what was said at each stage, and to what degree DeLorean understood the nature of what he was being offered, was the central question of the trial that followed. What is certain is that on October 19, 1982, DeLorean met with Hoffman and undercover FBI agents at the Sheraton Plaza Lorena Hotel in Los Angeles. The meeting was filmed, the cocaine was displayed, DeLorean handled it. He made the statement about it being better than gold. He was arrested the same day. The charges were federal drug trafficking charges. The evidence, the video footage from the hotel room, appeared to many observers at the time to be overwhelming. The trial. The factory in Belfast closed in February 1982, months before DeLorean's arrest, as the financial position had become untenable. The 2,500 workers in West Belfast lost their jobs. The British government, which had invested approximately £77 million in the enterprise, began the process of recovering what it could. The receiver appointed to manage the collapsed company found assets that covered a fraction of the liabilities. When the arrest came in October, it added criminal humiliation to commercial failure. The man who had promised to reinvent the American sports car, who had been on the covers of magazines, who had spoken at length about ethics and safety and consumer protection, was arrested for drug trafficking. The American press covered the story with the attention it deserved. The trial began in 1984 in Los Angeles. The prosecution presented the hotel room footage. They presented evidence of DeLorean's communications with Hoffman. They presented a case that, on the surface, appeared straightforward. The defense presented something else entirely. DeLorean's lawyers argued entrapment, the legal doctrine that holds it unlawful for law enforcement to induce a person to commit a crime they would not otherwise have committed. The defense argued that Hoffman, acting as a paid FBI informant, had identified a desperate man and systematically created the conditions for a transaction that DeLorean would never have initiated himself. The evidence in support of this argument was substantial and, in the event, convincing. Hoffman had been paid $1.8 million by the government for his role in the operation. He had a significant prior criminal history. The FBI's own records showed multiple contacts between Hoffman and DeLorean before the hotel meeting, contacts that the defense characterized as the progressive construction of a trap. The DEA agent who posed as a drug dealer in the hotel room was himself facing criminal charges in an unrelated matter. The jury deliberated for 9 days. Acquittal and Aftermath. On August 16, 1984, John DeLorean was acquitted on all 8 federal charges. The jury had accepted the entrapment defense. The government's case, despite the hotel room footage, had not overcome the reasonable doubt raised by the FBI informant's conduct, his payment, and the circumstances under which DeLorean had been brought into the transaction. DeLorean walked out of the courtroom in Los Angeles as a free man. He was 59 years old. His company was gone. His factory had closed. The 2,500 people in Belfast who had worked for him were unemployed. The British government had lost most of its investment. The investors who had backed the company had lost their money. The acquittal did not restore any of this. DeLorean spent the years following the trial in a combination of attempted rehabilitation and further legal difficulty. He faced fraud charges in the United Kingdom relating to the company's finances, charges that were eventually dropped after years of proceedings. He pursued various business ventures, none of which produced anything significant. He gave interviews, he wrote a memoir. He maintained consistently and until his death that he had been entrapped, that the FBI had identified a desperate man and manufactured a crime to destroy him. Whether that is fully accurate, partially accurate, or self-serving retrospection, 60 years of subsequent analysis has not produced a definitive answer. He died in 2005 at the age of 80 in Bedminster, New Jersey. His name was on a car that had become, through circumstances nobody had anticipated, one of the most famous automobiles in the world. Back to the Future. In 1985, Universal Pictures released a film called Back to the Future. The time machine in the film was a DeLorean DC-12, chosen by director Robert Zemeckis and producer Bob Gale because the car's futuristic appearance made it plausible, within the logic of the film, that a brilliant if eccentric scientist might have built a time machine into it. The choice was made while the DeLorean company was already in receivership and John DeLorean was facing trial. Nobody involved in the production anticipated what the film would become. Back to the Future was the highest-grossing film of 1985. It became one of the most beloved comedies in cinema history. It spawned 2 sequels and a cultural afterlife that continues to this day, and at the center of it was the DMC-12, the car that had been a commercial disappointment, that had been built in a war zone, that was associated in the public mind with cocaine and FBI stings and corporate collapse, became, through the extraordinary alchemy of popular cinema, the time machine. When children of the 1980s grew up and began spending money on collector cars, many of them had a specific image in their minds: a stainless steel car with gullwing doors and flames shooting from the exhaust. The DMC-12's value in the collector market is almost entirely a function of that film. Without Back to the Future, a DeLorean would be a curious footnote. An unusual car from a failed company, interesting to specialists and industrial historians, worth perhaps $25,000 in the collector market. Because of Back to the Future, it is a cultural icon. Approximately 9,200 DMC-12s were produced before the factory closed. Estimates suggest that between 6,500 and 7,000 survive in some condition today, a high survival rate driven by the film's cultural impact, which has ensured that owners understand and value what they have. The collector market for DeLoreans in 2024 is healthy and has been growing steadily. A standard DMC-12 in good documented condition, $55,000. An exceptional low-mileage example with full service history, $85,000. Cars with documented connections to the Back to the Future film production, screen-used vehicles or cars that can be authenticated as having appeared in the films, have sold for significantly more, with the most prominent screen-used examples achieving over $500,000. A small number of DeLoreans have been converted to electric drivetrains, a modification that is controversial among purists but functional and increasingly common. Values for electric DeLoreans are broadly similar to original specification cars, as the market has not yet resolved the question of how to weight the modification. The DeLorean Motor Company, a separate entity from the original, has operated since 1995 in Humble, Texas, manufacturing replacement parts and providing service for existing cars. For over 30 years, this organization has ensured that the cars can be kept in running condition indefinitely. John DeLorean never saw any of this. He died 4 months before the Texas company celebrated its 10th anniversary. He died before the collector market had fully recognized what the film had done for his car's legacy. What he built was not what he intended to build. The car that emerged from the Dunmurry factory was not the world-changing, safety-focused sports car he had described to investors and to the press. It was something more interesting and more complicated. A commercial failure that became a cultural legend, a dream that collapsed into disaster and then rose again through the most unlikely mechanism imaginable. A film about a time machine. Sometimes the story that gets told is not the story that was planned. Thank you for being at the Vault Motors. New story drops Tuesday. Subscribe so you don't miss it.